49. You can do that on your own time. So, Math for English majors, the introduction begins. I once asked an auditorium of undergraduates to recall their earliest memories of math. One of them shared a scene so peculiar and yet so universal that it burrowed deep into my unconscious, to the point where it has begun to feel like a memory of my own. At age 5, this student was assigned worksheets of addition problems. Trouble was, she didn't know how to read the funny symbols on the pages, the 2s and pluses and such. No one had ever taught her. Too intimidated to ask, she found a workaround, memorizing each sum not as a fact about numbers, but as an arbitrary rule about shapes. For example, 8 plus 1 equals 9 was not the statement that 9 is 1 more than 8, but a coded set of instructions. If you are shown 2 stacked circles, 8, followed by a cross, plus a vertical line, 1, and a pair of horizontal lines, equal sign, then you must fill in the blank space provided by writing a circle with a downward curling tail. That's a 9. Wow. With painstaking diligence, she taught herself dozens of rules like this, each as baroque and pointless as the last. It was mathematics by way of Kafka. Few people learn 8 plus 1 equals 9 this way, but sooner or later, almost every math student suffers a similar sense of confusion and resorts to similarly desperate workarounds. Whether in preschool, middle school, or grad school, befuddlement eventually descends, and mathematics becomes, in the words of David Hilbert, a game of meaningless marks on paper. So that's page 1. And a little bit of page 2, I thought I'd throw that. Cut off mid-sentence. So I figured we've got 45 minutes, an hour together. Claire and I will have some chit-chat, because I just like hanging out with Claire. Claire's great. So if you haven't encountered her poetry before, you should definitely check it out. Is Meltwater is here and Wilder, or do you know which books of Claire's are on?
It's Meltwater.
Meltwater, cool, beautiful. There's multiple Glacier poems, so if you're looking for the prize-winning poem, you have to read them all.
Right. I won't tell.
Yeah. So
Part of the cachet.
So we'll chat for a little bit and then open it up to questions. And I figure it's a nice. This is like a lovely size of group. If when you're asking a question, just give your name, and then if you feel like it, totally optional. Earliest memory of mathematics, because I find I like that as as a starting point for conversations about math. So, totally optional.
That's delightful.
Okay.
I really like that.
Do you want to? I don't know if that's yours.
Oh, I don't. Oh. I don't know. I remember being like in kindergarten or first grade and learning to count on my fingers. Learning that you could do that. Well, and I went to a Chinese immersion school actually in the Bay Area while I was growing up, and I learned there's a system of counting where you only have to use one hand, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I remember learning that early on and being very enchanted. Not that you have to do 6, and this is unwieldy. Imagine holding a mic as a 5-year-old, whenever and you can't do it, right? So I remember learning that, and I don't think there's anything different that comes with adding, but knowing that you can do that tactilely on one hand was a very cool thing that I learned.
That's nice. I also like the idea that Bay Area 5-year-olds are all holding mics.
Right, exactly. Maybe. You never know when you have to be on.
You never know.
You might have to be. But I wanted to start with this, if I may, read this little paragraph on page 112, which you will all have. You'll all be able to when you get this book. It says, an old chestnut holds that poetry is, quote, the art of giving different names to the same thing. The mathematician Henri Poincaré once replied that, quote, mathematics is the art of giving the same name to different things. And I was just like, ooh, like math and poetry. They go together. They absolutely go together. We do, we are both interested, although in different ways, in how do you talk about the big things, right?
Yeah.
And bigness or smallness or scope or scale or the sublime or things like that, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's all to be I'm happy to be here. This is really delightful. So
I like you pulled that out. Yeah, just to riff on that for a second.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, math and poetry, I think because they seem like such opposite poles to people, there's a million great quotes from mathematicians, Poincaré being just one, drawing those connections between math and poetry. I feel like every mathematician has their way of trying to express this impossible, kind of ineffable work that they do, and they always turn to poetry. Maybe a little bit of stolen valor, I think. But
Yeah. But it's true. Yeah, there aren't that many poets that talk about math. I hate to say it like that. They're I can find that one where they talk about it. Doesn't quite go in reverse. If there's time at the end, I wonder if we can talk about the corn pit.
Oh, sure.
Maybe just at the end though,
okay.
It's fun. Just we both had the same
right.
experience, but wrote about it in 2 very different ways.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's for another time. I wanted to ask, so this is your 4th book.
Yeah.
And my kind of overall question is always why this book right now? why a sort of a back to basics, or like
Yeah.
explaining it to an outsider. I wasn't English, but an outside, like why now? Why did that feel like this was the book that felt important to write for me?
It's a good question. In some ways, it's very much the opposite of my third book. Not to disappoint any fans of my big yellow games book, but that one, like carrying around one copy, just breaks my back. It's huge. It's full of these color illustrations of different pencil and paper games, and sort of dancing all across different kinds of mathematics. And this one, as you say, is back to basics. It's going back to really the essentials of school mathematics. Kind of in a perverse way, I was drawn towards the stuff that people dislike the most. Like books 1 through 3, I know the moves when you're trying to popularize mathematics, when you're trying to make it accessible for a broader audience. Like, you don't talk about school math, you talk about fun stuff. You talk about lottery tickets, and you talk about games, and the Death Star, and Sherlock Holmes, and you find anything you can that's not quadratics, that's not the stuff you do in school. And I love doing that. I'll do more books like that in the future. But for one book, I was feeling like, I want to dive right at the stuff that's the gate that keeps people out. The language itself, these symbols, that experience people have in school math of going in and like, okay, I guess this is the hour of the day when I move ink around a page, and I don't know why, and I don't know why the laws of this country require me to do this for an hour a day, but here I am with 24-hour suffering souls, and we're just going to get through it. There was nothing timely about it, really. I was having a conversation with my literary agent where he was saying, and he meant this as a good thing, I think, but he was like, this book, it didn't have to be written in 2024. This book could have come out in 1994. This book could have come out in 1964. Right? This book could have come out like that. Stop. Don't go too far back. We don't want to seem too antiquated. But this is true of all my books, I think. None of them are particularly pegged to the moment. But that's true of math. Math is not about, 2 plus 7 shouldn't change from week to week. It's getting at something eternal. And so I like to connect them to pop culture and connect math to things that are more current, have a little more purchase in the current imagination. But I also like to look at what's classic and timeless about it.
And I will say, like, as someone, is anyone here an English major? Is anyone here, like, on the English side? Yeah, a little bit. Don't be shy. It's cool. Maybe at one point, so like I was like, okay, I'm gonna read through this, and like, oh God, I'm gonna feel so stupid. Like, and it's like, oh, it's like he wrote it for someone like me, and I'm like, I'm not gonna get any of it or whatever. And most of it, like, I like read it, and I was like, oh, that does actually, like, I happen to have it open to logarithms, which I never actually did. I skipped, I didn't do calc. Doesn't matter. It's fine. I just like did high school math, and then I stopped. But like reading through it was not impossible. Like, it was so friendly and lovely, and like if I had someone like a math teacher who would describe and then like had fun with describing how math works, math would be like I wouldn't be a poet. No, I would still be a poet, but like in my experience would have been so different. So like it's just like a lovely, gentle book, and I especially appreciated like the phrase book at the back. Anyway, I was gonna ask you, did you have a favorite section of the book to write? Like, because you've broken it down, which is like delightful. Nouns, verbs, grammar, phrase book, but then there's other kind of sub-things in there, but like a favorite.
Well, I'm glad it clicked for you, or it felt like it connected, I think part of my strategy in this book, rhetorically, is to say that like this math, which is school math, is not easy, right? It's not like it's math English majors, so it's all dumbed down. It's like, no, English majors actually, I know a bunch, they're smart, they're like bright, intelligent, adult people, and math didn't click for them, but that's because math in its modern form is very strange. There's a lot of weird philosophical commitments kind of buried in the underbelly of it, and so part of the book is trying to unpack those. It's your favorite part. So it opens with nouns, which is what do I call that?
Nouns. The things called numbers.
The things called numbers, right? So the idea that numbers are kind of the essential nouns of mathematics. That one was fun to write because it kind of surprised me how much I had to say about rounding. I don't think of that as the most glamorous topic. Like, there's going to be 4 chapters in my book about rounding. But precision is really important. One of the ways you can tell people who are trying to be honest with mathematics from people who are trying to swindle you is how much false precision do they put in their numbers. Anytime somebody gives me 4 decimal places, like, either you don't know what you're doing, or you do and you think I don't. Like, those are kind of the only 2 options. If you're giving me so many decimal places, because the example I gave is my first book. which is, I think I did a word count on my Word doc of that book, and it was 83,700 and something. And so, is that the word count of my book, 83,726? Like, only if you know exactly what you mean by word count. Because are we counting chapter titles? Are we counting captions? Are we counting page numbers, footnotes, endnotes? The equation 1 + 1 = 2, is that one word? Or is that 5 words? Right? Like, any of those decisions will change your word count by a few hundred. So if anybody's giving you a word count to greater precision than like the nearest 100 or 1,000, they're kind of giving you false level of precision. They're giving you a false level of confidence. You can't, like, that third digit doesn't mean anything. So yeah, that one, I got swept up in that. Was that my favorite thing to write? Kind of, a little bit. I didn't expect that to become such a theme of the book, but it did.
Yeah. And I was surprised when I read it to be like, oh, I know where this chapter is going. This is going to be all about how precision is the most important thing, and we need to go all in depth, you know. And so I was surprised, like, actually, no, it's not for these several reasons, or it's not really a concept that's interesting for the reasons that you think it is.
Yeah, I got an unintentional laugh out of students in the spring, because we were just doing some estimation questions, and we were trying to figure out how much of something is produced in a year. So we figured it out per month, and it's okay, and then 10 months a year, so times 10. And they all laughed. They're like, 10 months a year? Like, where did this guy come from? It's about 10 months a year, right? Like, I'm off by 20%, but the number we were multiplying it by was off by way more than 20% probably. This was very rough estimation. So 10 months a year, I'm not gonna go to all the trouble of multiplying by another 1.2. You know, not too much trouble.
Yeah.
So I like imprecision.
Which is delightful. Okay. Another, I mean, like you're talking, there's a really fun anecdote. I had the page. I don't need to find it, but it's like baby Ben. Well, you're not a baby, but like younger kid Ben.
Still baby.
Still a baby. I mean, we're all still, cosmically,
right.
we're all still babies, give or take.
In geologic time.
Exactly. We're just where you like figured out you figured out how to add or something, and you're talking to your teacher, and you're like, I figured it out. 24. I mean, I can't do the whole.
I can tell you, this is my earliest memory of math.
Oh, hey, okay, do it.
It's I knew 25 plus 25 was 50 cents. Because unlike my 5-year-old, I had interacted with money a lot. For as far as she knows, there's just this little rectangle you hold up to the screen, and that's money. But like, you know, I dealt with quarters, and so I knew a quarter and a quarter made 50 cents. So 25 plus 25 is 50. And I was like, just in this stroke of genius, I was so proud of myself. I was like, okay, 24 is 1 less than 25. So 24 is 24. It's 49, 1 less than 50. And I was like, that is so smart. I am so smart. I was like, so pleased. So I was like, in the book I described it like Prometheus bringing fire down. So I told my kindergarten teacher, I was like, look what I've found. And she's like, oh, I love that thinking. I actually think about it. Like, I love that thinking. We're teachers. So. But, you know, 24 is 1 less than 25. The first 24, you lost 1, and then the second 24, you took away 1. So actually, the total was 48. I was just devastated. I collapsed. Like, oh my God, is the world, like, am I wrong? Is the world wrong? What? Yeah, so it was really, really crushing. I don't actually remember what rhetorical purpose I put that story to in the book, but it was like an early experience of like math and am I right, am I wrong, like the emotions and the sense of self being really tied up in that.
I sat there wounded and rebuffed, a king in a crumbling castle.
Yes,
Pay those.
Page 5,
I feel it. And so part of this was like made me curious about like kind of like career origins or like vocational origins or like did you know, were you like love math, that didn't put me off, whatever, like I figured out 48 out of, you know, I'm going to be a mathematician. Or was it like, oh, I know I want to be an educator and I'm going to combine these things. Or like, where did it become clear? Because you do still teach.
Yeah,
you teach.
Yeah, no, I love teaching.
Yeah. But like you also like, you write math books.
Yeah,
and like how did that come, when did that choice coalesce?
Honestly, like end of college. I think I kind of liked everything a little bit. I was a real dilettante. I liked all the subjects in high school. I liked all the subjects in college. Math, I sort of felt was useful. Because other people didn't feel the same way, right? I guess that's what it was. Is I liked everything a little bit. I like learning a little science. I like learning some social sciences. I did a psych major, and to me it was all cool stuff to learn. And other people would be like, oh yeah, psych is cool. Econ is okay. Math, no. And people did not want to that was not. It was impressive to them, but it was not interesting. It was like the way I've described sometimes boring magic. Yeah.
Right.
I'm sorry, who have you ever met that said that econ was okay?
I guess, do you feel like you find us polarizing? I mean, I talk to economists occasionally, they seem...
they don't all hate themselves?
They're ambivalent, I would say. I don't know if they would openly endorse econ. Yeah, I don't know, I mean...
anyone who would say
that econ is okay,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
right, yeah. Would you be on the not okay side?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think economics I think there's a defense to be made. I'm not sure I want to be the one to make it right now, but I think there's a defense to be made. So let's see. Yeah, right. So different subjects all appealed to me, and I could tell that math didn't to a lot of people. That one was separate. That one was weird. And so first in education, I decided I like teaching. I like talking to people about ideas. World needs math teachers. I don't think anybody's going to say, like, if I go to law school, people could reasonably say to me, did the world need another lawyer? But if I go into math education, I don't think anyone's going to say to me, the world didn't really need another math teacher. Like, we're glutted with them already. No offense to lawyers in the audience, but good lawyers we need.
Right.
So it drew me into education first, and then I always enjoyed writing. I did some comedy writing in college. I was sort of dabbling with that after college, and then a friend, sort of behind my back to another friend, said, like, why is he doing all this random writing? Like, he's a math teacher, he explains stuff really well. Why doesn't he write about that? Like, funny writing about math. And I was like, well, that is good career advice.
Right. They should have said it to your face.
Smart. Yeah, it's
right.
Yeah,
I mean, you
love,
figured it
yeah,
out.
exactly. Yeah, right. No, yeah, well, yeah, it got back to me eventually, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
And then that was sort of, and then I started a blog called Math with Bad Drawings, and then the books, it's sort of like the book contract kind of fell into my lap in a very lucky way that I didn't. Yeah, that's not, it's not good career advice for the young people. Like, how do you get a book contract? Like, just log into it. Just really, but I think the reason, well, to give myself the 4% of credit I deserve for that, I had chosen a topic that people really were thirsty for. As much, like, to some degree readers, but also, both my literary agent and my editor were people who reached out to me first before I had the chance to pitch them. I think because they were both English majors who wanted, they were like, oh, somebody who wants to talk about math in a way that neither is flying miles over my head, nor is treating me like an idiot.
Right,
Someone who respects that this is challenging for me, but wants to share it with me and thinks it's cool. And so that's where I wound up. I don't know, I sort of, I think at the end of the introduction I say, I was sort of guided to it, but not the way that, like, a Greek hero is guided to their fate, more the way, like, a tourist is going the wrong way, and they're like, God, everyone goes, no,
you obviously
shunt it back into the correct way. And, like, that's sort of how my career unfolded. I was like, people are like, there we go, right over there, that you could be useful.
And you're like, cool, happy to be here. I like lots of stuff, so great. Might as well. I found a niche, and in the book you talk about, because Taryn is your wife is a mathematician.
Yes.
And considers herself a mathematician, and you were like, no, I'm not a mathematician.
Right. Yeah.
But you're like, so my question was like, but do you have like a favorite? I was asking, so my husband is a math guy, but like kind of applied math. He's like, oh no, I'm a statistician now because he's an actuary. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But he makes a little appearance in the. I don't think it's in the book. I think it's in the notes. I found it. I was like, oh, Dan, you're in there. He was like, that's too kind. You say nice things about him. And I was like, Dan, how do you phrase this question? It's like, I want to know what Ben's favorite, like, part of math is, or like, and he was like, you just say, like, what's your favorite math? And I was like, no, you don't. That's stupid. You don't say, what's your favorite math? I know language, that's not, he's like, no, that is what you say. You say, what is your favorite math? What's your favorite math? Is that right? Is he right?
I feel like I go with the poet here over the actuary.
Right. I mean, I didn't have an alternative, but I was like,
I'm not sure. What's your favorite math? Yeah, how would you?
Discipline?
I mean, like, it
genre.
sounds weird, but I do think that he's correct.
Okay, all right.
Just
We'll
like the vibe
we've
was off.
got a stamp of approval then.
But,
I feel like one I come back to, because everyone who writes about math is fractal geometry, and so that's all fun. Euclidean geometry is part of what pulled me into. It's funny because I'm not, maybe the geometry draws me in because I'm not a geometric thinker at all. I'm really not visual. You can tell in the drawings, actually. It's not drawn by someone with a deep visual sense. And so maybe that's the stuff that's more tantalizing to me, sort of just out of reach sometimes, the kind of the visual aspects.
Yeah. Although I'm like, knowing nothing is a follow-up question from someone who knows nothing about what I'm about to. I'm like, fractals though, or like, I don't know anything about geometry, but are they not related to geometry or how things look Or like, isn't there's a visual component?
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
But you're
They're
like-
very deeply visual. But maybe that's
but
what
not in
draws
the
me in, I
same-
think, is like,
Okay.
it's the part that's a little out of reach.
That wouldn't be quite, okay,
And
it's not like the
so, sort of-
easy thing,
Yeah,
it's like
exactly,
at that edge of,
yeah,
I don't-
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, or it involves skills that I don't usually practice, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah, I was gonna check, how are we doing on time?
yeah, I
great.
was gonna say like,
I wanna make sure we
Yep,
switch
you're
over to
good.
that, cause I'd love to do, it's like almost 7:30 now.
which is great, cause that was my
Do you wanna?
last
oh,
question,
okay,
unless you
okay,
wanted
yeah,
to have
no,
fun
yeah.
with like, is mathematics, what was it, extruded or something, it was like frankly a horrible word choice
Yeah,
on your
yeah,
part.
yeah.
But you posted this question on, was it Twitter?
This
was
is Twitter,
invented
yeah.
and discovered, not extruded.
No,
Yes.
but that was a different one, that was a follow-up,
So
like, is it a
the classic question is math invented or discovered, which is sort of endlessly debated in math popularization circles.
Is it excreted or does it congeal?
Yeah,
That's
that
what
was
it was. And I'm like, Ben! No, Ben! No!
So this is part of my crowd. I think on Twitter, the people who follow me are all like very sincere math educators.
Yeah.
So when I tweet something like that, it's just crickets.
Right.
Like, I don't know why.
Except me, I was like, I see this, I'm interacting with
Yeah,
this.
whereas I was like, I thought that was my best tweet in ages.
I thought so, right. That was all different.
Extruded or does it congeal? I mean, obviously a little bit of both.
These are metaphors, right? These are the things. Anyway, we don't actually have to discuss that. That was like, that's my actual last question. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, does anyone want to ask questions? So yeah, go ahead. And if you can say your name too, actually.
My
Oh,
name
and
is
your first
Bailey.
memory of math.
Oh, yeah.
My
right.
name's
Well, if
Bailey.
there's time.
And my first memory of math is my grandma asking me if I could see the numbers in my head when I was nine.
What did you say?
I do, but like it's not necessarily like your typical like I see the symbols, not necessarily.
Yeah.
How old are you?
I am 12.
Now, how old are you then?
When she asked.
First-
When
when
she
you
first
asked.
memory.
Yeah, for that first
I'm
one.
sorry, I didn't.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think maybe 5 or 6. I'm sure I have
Yeah.
memories before that. But I don't know.
Yeah, that's a lot of early childhood memories.
Anyway, I'd just like to elaborate on the fact that, so I'm not like, thinking about it, I'm not sure if it's like 100% grammatically correct, but also like, it's like saying what's your favorite dog when you know you mean kind of dog.
Not
Like, I feel
individual
like
dog.
I feel like someone would understand that, I'm not actually sure it's technically correct anymore, but I feel like if you asked that, like, probably know who that is.
Yeah. Okay. That seems fair. So you can report back. General approval.
I will.
I'd heard it. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm Lulu. I think my first memory of math
Yeah.
is probably, I don't know, like, I think I have this memory of like, I don't know, kindergarten before COVID started.
Yeah.
I remember subtraction was being taught. And in my head I was like doing multiplication tests. I felt very full of myself. I was like, oh, these people doing subtraction, I already am doing my multiplication. I was 5 and I had to relearn subtraction. But my question is, like, did you enjoy school, or was like it just like something you went by?
Yeah.
What was your favorite school?
Yeah, it's funny. I really liked school, actually. I enjoyed it. Middle school, not that much. Middle school's tough. I've taught middle school, and it's a weird time. Because there's basically 3 strategies for teaching middle school. Sidebar to the question, I'll get back to your question. But there's 3 strategies. One is you put them in with the little kids. You know, you do a K-8 school. My sister teaches a K-8 school. The idea being, well, maybe we can keep them younger for longer. And then there's the 6 through 12 strategy. I've taught at 6 through 12. The UK does it all that way, which is basically throwing the wolves. You know, just like, let's watch them sink or swim. And then there's the more typical US strategy, which is what I had, which is the quarantine strategy. Can't let these people around the little ones. Can't really have them around the big ones. Get them in a little building. They'll hold their breath for 3 years, and we'll just get them through. So my own middle school experience, I found tough. Although, you know, 8th grade was there were things that were starting to be enjoyable in 8th grade. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a lot of the people who I admire most in math and in related spaces are, as you call them, autodidacts, right? Real self-learners. So they never really connected with school that much, but they just would get really deeply curious about things and go out and explore. And I admire it partly because it's just not the way I am. I'm much more, you set up a little system, like a little rat maze for me to run with cheese at the end, and I go, oh, I'm sure the rate is 20% quizzes and 30% tests and 50% homework, and I run my little maze and I get my cheese at the end. And I was always just very, very satisfied with that. I took very easily to school, which both as a teacher and as just someone who's like been in the world, I see where that's not actually how the whole world runs. Like school is a bit of an artificial environment. it's just a severe artificial environment, but like that suited me very nicely. So I did generally enjoy school, but I don't know. Yeah, I say especially as a parent now, I see limitations in enjoying school too much. You know, it's important. You learn a lot of things in school. I'm a believer in education, but I'm especially an admirer of education that happens outside of classrooms, and people who chase that down. Does that answer your question about school? Yeah, go ahead.
And how old are you?
I'm
Like fourth grade 10, fifth grade 10,
Sixth grade.
sixth grade?
Okay, cool. Sorry, yeah, sorry.
I'd
Sorry to
just
say.
like to add, I'm a believer in education, just not the education I'm getting right now.
Yeah. I think that is something in middle school I spent a lot of time being very critical of my teachers, and I think I was probably meaner at times than I could have been. But also I think it was probably a healthy part of my intellectual development. It's like it's your interaction with power and authority, and so as a teacher now, I don't always feel like such a power and an authority, but if my students are going to be critical of the way I'm wielding it, they're totally fair. I think that's their place in the world to be in the classroom on that side of it and asking those questions.
Yeah, most teachers don't exactly agree with you.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, middle school teachers must know what they're signing up for, though.
I started in high
Right,
school and there was a little attached middle school, and I would look and go, those poor fools. What are they doing in middle school? And then it was when we moved to the UK and schools are 6 through 12, and I got a job at a high school. And in the job interview, I got the impression that they really needed me to go in and be the specialist for kind of the fancy high school math. That they they were having an IB school, and they were having trouble with students' scores on the kind of the top level of the IB.
Yeah.
And then I got there, and it was like there were 2 guys with PhDs in the department. There was like a very strong department mathematically. They were going to figure out the IB stuff. But meanwhile, the middle school lessons basically had all been, like the curriculum had been written in an afternoon 15 years earlier. And the way everybody taught the lessons was like they walked in holding the book and like, let's at page 97 today, kids, and exercise 2, let's go.
But in a British accent, though.
Yes, in a British accent.
Say again in a British accent.
I really cannot. They're so good at accents there. Yeah, they could do, like, I met a guy I taught with who could do a Virginia accents, like different parts of Virginia. And I was like, man, I can barely do an American accent. Middle school, how did I get out of middle schools? I teach middle school. Oh yeah, anyway, went there. Yeah, so I wanted focusing much more on the middle school, because I could just see that's where, again, like, that was me getting guided like a tourist to where the need was. At that school, the need was for somebody to pay attention to the middle schoolers and just take their intellectual growth seriously. And so I spent 3 years really focused on that. And it was great. I really liked the middle schoolers. And so it's been a year here teaching middle school part-time, and now I'm doing community college, which is just a little more flexible. So I like flexibility, although I miss middle schoolers.
Is that your main teaching now?
Yeah, it's still part-time. The writing is still sort of my full-time thing. And so yeah, I teach at St. Paul College. So I'm teaching sort of like a class or 2 a term there, just to kind of keep myself in the game, you know. Yeah, Michael.
So your agent talked about how you could have been doing this in 1994.
Yeah.
The new math was supposed to fix all these problems,
Right,
right?
yeah.
So what?
Yeah. I just read a great book. Christopher Phillips is a historian who wrote a book on the new math, a political history, it's called. And yeah, my takeaway is basically it was so new math, right? Hands for familiarity with new math as a to varying degrees. All right. So yeah, new math, right? Curriculum that rolled out starting in the late 50s, really in the early 60s, and then throughout the 60s, a very sort of ambitious reform movement in math education, big on critical thinking, big on the idea that mathematics is where we learn how to reason. And so steering into a very abstract vision of mathematics. If you learned about sets at all in K through 12, like that's where it would have come in, is in new math. Venn diagrams is actually one of the brighter legacies of new math. So I think in high school they more or less knew what they were doing. You know, so basically it was sort of federally funded but initiated by research mathematicians who wanted to, and all the context for all this Cold War, really powered by the idea that, like, what if the Soviet kids are all brilliant at math and our kids are just these dumb Americans? Like, we got to get them good, critical, creative reasoners. And part of it was the kind of creativity and openness of that kind of thinking, in contrast to the rigid Soviet communist mindset. High school, they more or less knew what they were doing, I think. And so they did new textbooks and some reforms. And then elementary school, they rolled out way too fast. They really didn't know what they were doing at the elementary school level. Didn't have as much teacher buy-in, and it was sort of a well-known fiasco. Yeah.
I just like to point out that I'm a communist and I have a very open mindset.
That's fair. Yeah. Right. Well,
Speaking of sex.
Yeah. The McCarthy era did not take as rosy a view.
Hello, my name is Kat, and my first memory of math is my dad teaching me to count and telling me that the numbers went forever, and I cried. That was like realization that I would never learn all of them or get to the end of them.
Infinity.
How old were you?
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it was.
It hits you when you're.
It was a heady moment.
How old were you?
4 or 5, probably. I need to count kind of age.
Yeah.
I think we were probably working on like 19, 20, and I was like, how many of these are there?
Are we almost done?
Right, yeah. Okay, so this is like a just for fun question, but everybody says Bach is like the most mathematical composer.
Yeah.
Whatever, in your opinion or to your knowledge, either or both of you, who's the most mathematical literary writer?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, there's several who do beautifully mathematical writing. David Foster Wallace who is not someone I actually haven't read as much of his fiction as I need to go back and slog through the 1,000 pages of glory. But was really obsessed with math. I think he may have done I think his undergraduate degree was philosophy, but he wrote a book on Cantor and the mathematics of infinity. Actually, there you go. It's like highly technical. When I was writing my book on calculus, I read that, and I read Eugenia Chang, who's a mathematician, wrote a book on infinity like while I was working on that book. And it was really funny because it's like, okay, here's the book by the category theorist, the research mathematician. Breezy, full of analogies, very kind of just playful, simple prose. Here's the book by the novelist, like densely technical, full of mathematical jargon. So Wallace was really obsessed with math. I think the probably the one I'd pick would be Borges.
I was gonna say Borges.
Yeah. I love Borges. Like all of my books, I think mention Borges. This one in multiple places. I mean, he both like has a very symbolical, mathematical grasp on things. He wrote essays on Zeno's paradox, and Pascal has a line about God being a sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere, sort of an infinite sphere. So Pascal's sphere is another nice essay of his, and then lots of his stories are have these sort of little puzzles of infinity embedded in them. So I think of Borges as sort of the ultimate math literary figure.
Do you like poetry at all?
That's just the next person.
Oh,
I feel about poetry how a lot of people feel about math, I think. I'm like intimidated by it and I respect it. And
No,
I think that's another
that's
similar
actually-
thing. You're
yeah,
like, oh,
yeah.
I read a lot. And like, oh, they're like, no, not those, no. So I like totally get it. There's a writer named Gertrude Schnackenberg. There's a poet. She's criminally underknown. She's like reclusive. Robert Nozick, the philosopher, was her husband. And he I can't remember when he died, but died, the 50s, I think like early-ish. And she has this beautiful, beautiful elegy called Heavenly Questions, which is like where it's this beautiful blank verse, like highly rhythmical, like poetry, and she talks about like infinity, and she talks about like Archimedes and the Sand Reckoner, which is like one of the most poetic mathematical texts, actually. I think like Archimedes' Sand Reckoner, like how many grains of sand could fit in the anyway, it's amazing. And it's like a way of her talking about like eternity and death, but also like going very, very micro with numbers and very, very huge with numbers. It's beautiful. I don't know. Do you have Heavenly Questions here?
We don't. I was just checking.
She's hard to. But you can get it online. Wonderful. I mean, if you want to like read and be like and just like sob for days. If you don't want to do that, then maybe not this book. But if you like really great combination of like exploration of like the sublime, especially just like terrifying, beautiful math, poetry, all that together, so good. Would highly recommend. Yeah.
Thank you. Could you spell Schnackenberg, please?
Schnackenberg. And Gertrude is with a J. Gjertrud. So, GJ.
Okay, cool. I'll have to.
Yeah.
I was trying to decide whether to pull out my phone and write that down.
Right.
While I'm in front, it seems a little rude. Wisława Szymborska also has some really nice mathematical poems. She has one on pi and one on statistics. So it's called the Introduction to Statistics, something like that. I forget how it's translated, but it's imagining sort of like a room of 100 people who are the statistically ordinary 100 people, but then doing her own imaginative extrapolations that you could not actually get good statistics on.
Right. No estimate.
64 fundamentally honest of those 100.
Hello, my name's Amelia. I honestly feel like one of my early memories of math was like in 5th grade, just like doing workbooks. Or I feel like when you were saying, I feel like there's one time where there was a back of the book that just had numbers that got bigger and bigger. And I was like, what's a Google? I'm gonna put that. So I'm a high school math teacher, and I just walked in here, and I was like,
Oh,
and,
fun, okay.
and my partner, who's the English teacher, was like, doing math class.
Okay, yeah. Oh, good timing.
And so I'm like relatively young as a teacher and in grad school, thinking very philosophically about mathematics education, very
Yeah.
frustrated with my student teaching, whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're familiar with like Hung Si Woo, who writes a lot about like bringing back like precision in math education.
No, actually, no.
So he's kind of like written basically textbooks for teachers
Yeah.
that goes through all of math from like K through 12 at the level of like like at a mathematical level that could be
Yeah.
taught in colleges.
Yeah.
And I think that, and so I was kind of thinking a lot about that, and like really bringing back all this precise language that's not in textbooks, or like thinking about things with a lot more precision, and also thinking about, all right, like teaching with like algebraic structures in mind, maybe like back
Yeah.
here or something like this.
Yeah.
But then when I go into class and I'm like using all sorts of vernacular or
Yeah.
like heuristics or whatever that maybe are sort of all over the place to try to just help a kid figure out that if you divide 5x by 5, it'll just be
Yeah.
x.
Yeah.
And so obviously your books kind of wed this kind of
Yeah.
informality and precision, and I was just curious if you could talk at all in your teaching or when you're doing these books, how you walk that line.
Yeah, the books are very much on the vernacular side. But I remember thinking with my first book, one of the most satisfying reactions I would get would be if I gave to a mathematician or saw a mathematician reading a chapter, reading a passage, and they knew what mathematical idea I was expressing, but of course I'm doing it in like joke-filled English, so I'm not doing it in careful, precise notation. And I could see them sort of compile it in their minds. They would read the paragraph and they go, and it was that like, oh yeah, that checks out. Like no falsehoods there. It lacks precision, but I see. Yeah, there's no overtly misleading elements of that. That was like the highest approval. And it was really a great stamp of approval. My writing lives totally on the vernacular side. This one moving a little bit towards trying to put some precise meanings on there. I guess one thing that brings to mind for me is just how many different forms of precision, or kinds of precision we have in mathematics. Because there's a particular, in a undergraduate and graduate education, we tend to focus on is this very 20th century vision, this sort of post-Bourbaki, highly axiomatic, rigorous development of mathematical theory from axioms that are laid out and axioms which are a little flexible in some sense, right? You highlight the places where you could choose different axioms, and then you use those axioms to prove sort of almost mind-numbingly obvious statements that you know need to be true, but that's just a way of checking you chose the right axioms, and it sort of proceeds like that. I think that way it's a very 20th century way of doing mathematics, I think, a little bit 19th century, but prior to that just would have been an alien form of mathematics, I think, to anyone earlier than the 19th century. Sort of the rigor was essentially a response to the crisis of Fourier analysis and like not knowing what converged. So sometimes when I think about, maybe this is just me rationalizing as I'm doing something that doesn't meet that 20th century standard of rigor, I go, Bernoulli would have done this, and I wouldn't need to specify which Bernoullis, so any of the Bernoullis would have done it this way, they would have been fine with it. I guess that's something, I've been reading a bit of math history lately, and I find it really interesting. I find it almost useless for talking about it with students, because like, you take a student who doesn't enjoy math, you know what they'll love is the history of this, the ins and outs. Like, you think math is too simple and neat? Like, that's not what they think. Let's make it really messy. Let's get all the complications. So but for me, it like informs my way of thinking, and it might be that what you take away from like an undergraduate algebra course is just the idea like, identities are really important. That might be it. It's sort of like, but then that in a lot of student interactions, then you're thinking about like, just thinking about the identity, right? People phrase it as a lot of multiplying by 1 or adding 0, but that's you can sort of, that higher education can still be helpful in framing that. Anyway, that's a long answer that I don't know if that bridges those two sides. But a lot of what I like about education, what I find hard about it is it's easy to find yourself caught between two ways of thinking that both seem necessary and aren't compatible. And like education offers you a bunch of those dichotomies. So part of what's exciting about it and challenging is trying to find those syntheses.
Alright, you guys wanna go buy some books?
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then have to say hi and answer individual questions. So, yeah,
Awesome.
so,
Great.
cool. All right, well, thanks so much all for coming out on a Monday night. Appreciate being here.
And we're gonna head over to the glass cages, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys there.